series called Russell, Speirs and Friends. Today, my friend is Elizabeth Stone, the head of Winchester College. Hello, Elizabeth.
Hi, good to see you, Russell.
How are you doing? You all right?
Thriving, thank you.
Good, excellent. Well, we'll come back to you in a minute, Elizabeth. I'll just explain to people who are watching what this is all about. So those of you who've seen it before know how this works. But in a minute, I'll get chatting to Elizabeth and ask her to tell us and to tell me a little bit more about herself and Winchester College, of course, where she works. And then I'm going to ask Elizabeth, as I've asked everybody so far, this question, which is at the heart of this podcast series, which is what do you think helps a school to thrive, or what do you think is one of the ingredients that you might highlight that helps make a thriving school? So I think you've got something up your sleeve, I hope, Elizabeth. You're ready for that question when we get to it. Um, so now, Elizabeth, we first met. We met in Sydney, didn't we? I
We
think that's
did.
right.
Yeah, yeah. You.
And have you? Or what can you remember? It might be different from what I can remember.
Oh, I remember. I remember that we had a cup of tea and then went for a walk. And I thought I'd show you around. We walked down from one part of the campus to another, and it's a beautiful, extraordinary beachside location. And so
Hmm.
I thought, right, well, I'll make sure we walk right along next to the beach. And I looked down and I saw one of my colleagues emerging from the water in a wetsuit with a gaggle of sort of 15-year-olds behind her, all with snorkels and so on. And I said, oh, what have you been up to? Oh, we're just doing, it's marine biology today. And I had to turn to you and say, I promise I did not choreograph that. And I hate to break it to you, we don't do that every single day. But it was almost the sort of cliche of what one might imagine life in sunny Australia and education to be like. So that was very
Yeah.
happily timed. I remember that very clearly.
Yeah. I remember we had quite a laugh as well about the Australian use of certain informal language, let's say, on the
Yes.
radio. That's what I remember that. So, um, anyway, you're now at Winchester. We obviously were involved in your appointment, which was fantastic and a great honour for us. But perhaps you could just say a little bit about Winchester College first of all, because it's a famous school, but not everybody necessarily knows it. So, could you just tell us a little bit about it, please?
Well, it's an extraordinary school with a tradition of doing things a bit differently. And that came right from the foundation because back in 1382, when this, the chancellor of the country back then, as sort of equivalent of prime minister, came up with this idea, which is we've been depopulated after the Black Death. We need educated people to run the government and the church. How can we build that up? And he did what no one had ever done before, which is he created a school in a form that we really recognize today. And so he actually started by building a college at Oxford, which then was new. So it's still called New College, but it's 14th
Mm,
century.
yeah.
And then he built Winchester College as the pipeline through. So it was, let's take them in at a young age. We'll educate them until they're ready to go to the university, and to sort of turbo boost this rebuilding of the country and the education of the next generation, and creating that as an educational institution where if you think of like an Oxford or a Cambridge college, that sort of the quadrangle where you live and work
Mm,
together and you worship together and you eat together, that was unique. And it's extraordinary today. We still have the same number of scholars, 70, in the school as back in 1382 when the statutes were laid
wow.
down. They still study every night in the same rooms where they've been studying since it was founded. We worship in the same chapel. We eat in the same college hall. That continuity is extraordinary. So that's kind of and that has really gone on. The next one to be built on that model was Eton and King's College, Cambridge, and that was following the model set by William of Wykeham. And then that tradition of school kind of built up from there. So it's had, I would argue, a sort of worldwide impact on what it is to
Mm.
educate young people and the way you do it. But I would
And
say,
now, just in terms of sort of facts and figures, how many it's boys only, just about, isn't it?
so
That's changing, but how many
um,
boys
so
have you
we've
got?
got about 700 boarders in the school, and all of our boarders currently are boys. We're going to build a boarding house, 2 boarding houses soon for the admission of girls in a couple of years. We've got about a very small number of day pupils, about 30 or 40. Again, that will expand, not hugely, but we'll expect that to increase in the next few years. And so it's clearly outgrown the original 70, although that's still at the core. But it's a genuine learning community, and I think that's one of the distinctives, both in terms of the quality of the learning and the intellectual life, which is extraordinary, but also one of the few places in the world where the teachers and the pupils are living together and working together, and that creates a very special atmosphere and learning environment, which is both extraordinarily busy because it really means the learning is just going on round the clock, 7 days a week, but also very beautiful. And it's one of the most beautiful places I've ever had the privilege to be, let alone work in every day.
Yeah, no, it is. Yeah, it is extraordinary. There's lots of uneven pathways and
Yes.
knobbly walls, and a lot of repointing I think is needed there. So on the
Yeah.
brickwork. So Elizabeth, when you first sort of left school and sort of set out in the world, as it were, you studied to be a lawyer, didn't you? I
I
think.
did. I did.
So
So my
how did you end up teaching, and how did you end up at Winchester College? How did you end up in
so
the UK, for that matter?
yeah, well, I've lived and worked in the UK on a number of occasions. So I actually did 6 months as a child when my parents were over here working for a period. So that was my first experience. Then I went to university. I did my law degree and an arts degree. Went into the law, thoroughly enjoyed it. Then I ended up at Oxford for my postgrad. By this stage, I was really specialising in commercial contract law. I've still got my thesis on a shelf behind me. If anyone wants to read 75,000 words of commercial contract law, really enjoyed that. Actually, found it thoroughly academically stimulating. But over that time, had a growing conviction that I might end up in teaching, and I think probably for 2 reasons. One is the connection with doing some good in the world in law, can be very direct, but in many careers, possibly the majority of them, it's quite indirect. There were times when I was doing things that were intellectually really enthralling, but at the end of the day, it was like, I think I made the economy slightly more efficient today. That's probably the best I can point to. And that wasn't sort of grabbing my heart. And also I'm pretty gregarious and I'm a bit of a people person. And I'd always seen teaching as a very real possibility. And over time that just, I was thoroughly enjoying what I was doing, but I just had this sort of pull that kept increasing. So finally I took the plunge, having spent all of those years getting a couple of law degrees and working in various fields, and then became a maths teacher. So that was kind of a big jump at the time, but actually had been coming on for a while.
Okay. Well, you're obviously very good at it. You rose through the ranks at Winchester itself, Cheltenham Ladies, and then I think you went back to Australia. You
Mm-hmm.
ran the girls' school, which I always have to remember is Queenwood, not
No,
like the
no
school we have
S.
here,
Greenwood School.
Queenswood.
Yes.
Queenwood in Mosman, Balmoral, around there.
Yes, well done. Yeah.
I can never remember. I think it's both. Anyway, it doesn't really. We're not here to talk about Sydney
Yes.
suburb. But and now you're at Winchester, so that's fantastic. Let's get to the heart of this conversation. Then I want to ask you what you think makes a school thrive. I mean, obviously there are lots of things that make a school thrive. Brilliant teachers, all kinds of things. But what would you like to pick for our library of ideas on
Yeah,
this?
well, I've taken care not to choose something that one of your previous guests has already said, and there's really nothing in what they've said that I would disagree with. There are many things that are needed for it to thrive, but the one I've chosen to dwell on today is knowing what you stand for, and I think schools are really rich and complex ecosystems, and they throw a lot of demands at you from all directions, and they're often in tension with each other. it's a very complex decision-making environment. Not only that, you sit right in the middle of very strong cultural currents, and everybody's been to school, so therefore everybody knows how to run one. So you won't find a person that doesn't have an opinion on what makes a good school, or what you as the head should be doing. So there can be enormous pressure to do things in certain ways. And I think one of the things I find most helpful in any number of ways is really having a solid grounding in what you stand for and what you believe in, because that is going to help you navigate those currents.
So let me just check I've understood. So you're under a lot of pressure from well-informed or not well-informed people, or just trends in education, the sector,
Yeah.
to do more and more. There must be certain things that matter a lot at Winchester that you're not prepared to sacrifice.
Yeah.
There must be certain ways of doing things, ways of learning, ways of living as a community, ways of growing up that you and indeed some of your predecessors will have found to be important, and you're not prepared to change those. So what would be some of the things that really mark out, an
Yeah, no,
the life of a student
I'm
at
ready to
Winchester
count
that you
the
wouldn't?
ways, Russell. I'm ready to go. That's a great question. Let me give you a couple of examples. So we're a big boarding school, 700 boarders, and there are a lot of schools, and our year of entry is year 9, so they're 13 when they come in. And there's a lot of schools that it's a positive marketing feature that they come in and they have single rooms. And I can completely understand that is intuitively and instantly appealing in many ways. Let's think about the impact of that. So we know what happens when young people don't spend enough time in each other's company. So all over the world, post-COVID, we've got data coming in, all different countries, and teachers saying these children are coming in socially and emotionally delayed. They can't cope with all sorts of, right? We've seen that everywhere. Why? Because they haven't spent enough time in each other's company. Then you think even in a non-COVID scenario, they're spending more and more of their lives online. And that means you can instantly retreat into the place where everybody is already doing the things you're interested in. They agree with you, and the minute they disagree, you can just leave that little thing and go over here. That is not cultivating the skills that they need to be able to relate to other people effectively. They are not learning the art of friendship. So we have dormitories, and that is not an accident. That's a design feature. And we put them together. I mean, literally this afternoon, I had a 14-year-old in here. He's in his second year of boarding. And he said, I cannot believe how close I've become. These are the best friendships I've ever had in my life. And it's not because they're all the same. In fact, our housemasters, when they're selecting people, are trying to get a balance. They're trying actively to select for a balance and a bit of diversity in there.
Yeah.
But you learn how do we decide what we want to do together? Or if you've had a fight with someone, you learn how to make up, or you learn not to go down that road of having a fight in the first place, because you can't run away at the end of the day and just sort of choose now I'm going to be with my family, or I'm going to be online. You live with them. So that's a countercultural thing. If we didn't believe in that, we might start apologizing for, well, I'm very sorry that your child has to share a room. I was like, no, this is what you should want for your child, particularly in the age of AI for the future, when human skills and human interactions and those relationships are going to be at a premium. So that's, one example where you flip its head and you give a new perspective on it.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great example, because there are plenty more, well, I would imagine over the last 50 years, more and more schools that have gone down the route of dividing up the big rooms into smaller rooms and ensuite showers and so
Absolutely.
on. Can we finish maybe with one example that I know a little bit about? So I don't want to pretend that I know nothing about it, but I would love to know more, and perhaps I'd love more people to know about it as well, which is what you call divs, because that's a tradition at Winchester that I imagine could come under pressure to change. It's not for me to say whether you'll change it or not, but Can you just remind me and tell everyone else a little
Yeah,
bit what
absolutely.
gives is? Because it's quite an unusual thing.
Yeah, so it's a quite a distinctive thing about Winchester, and it goes back. I've only been here 2 terms. I have to do my research. I think it's like 150 years, but it's in that
Mm,
sort of
mm.
range, right? And it's a cross-disciplinary, non-examined subject that they do right from their first day right through to when they finish. And it aims to set the scene in which they are doing all of their other learning. So it roughly moves through eras of history. So, it might do, medieval history, early modern history. Then you go up to 1789, and then you look, then what's going on after that, and you're looking at major cultural, political, artistic movements. It's certainly centered on British and European history, but they also do some looking at, for instance, at the moment, our first years are doing ancient African civilizations and so on. So we're trying to bring some contrast in, and they see, the Persian Empire, or, Chinese, and getting the major arc of that.
Okay.
And then what's unique about it is because it's unexamined, it can be cross-disciplinary. So that means you can do the poetry of it, and you can
Mm.
do the architecture of it, and you can do some history in it. You might, be doing the politics of it. And then over time, it's probably a bit more structured in the lower years, where we're really trying to set the scene and think about how the more you know, knowledge is like Velcro. The more you know, the more easily you pick up new knowledge. So you think about all of the things that they're doing in science and history and French and English and so on in the other
Mm,
areas of the
mm.
curriculum. Having this as a background actually enables them to learn better and more efficiently in those other areas as well. And then as they get older, there's a bit more freedom to follow where the individual interests, both of the pupils and of the teachers, lie. So the teacher, for instance, I've got one colleague who's just an outstanding art historian. And so in the top years, a lot of the stuff that he's doing, not all by any means, but a
Mm,
lot of
mm.
it is done by engaging with works of art, and that's his just
Okay.
passion. And when you're with something, it's infectious and
Sure.
enthusiasm. And so I've got another colleague who's a very distinguished physicist and mathematician, and so he's really interested. Like, they might all be doing, I don't know, the Black Death, and are you going to be looking at I don't know, the paintings of the time, or the eras around that, and Bruegel and so on? Or he was really interested in the epidemiological modeling of that, and then looking and comparing it to COVID, and what are we
Mm.
experiencing now. So there's incredible range to kind of play to the strengths and interests of. It's very discussion based, so it's
Okay.
really good for developing
Mm.
those skills. And again, I mean, talk about knowing what you stand for, right? I think there have probably been periods in the school's history where the pressure has been, well, if you cut that out of the curriculum, you could add another
Sure.
2 GCSEs or something.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. That's a great, thing to do. But sometimes that can just be another trophy on the shelf.
Mm.
And you've got to weigh up of what's the opportunity cost, what do we miss out on. And Div is such a special formative experience. Generations of our graduates, our old Wickhamists, will say Div was the thing
Yeah.
that I remembered and loved most. And I'll give you one little anecdote. The other day I was sitting with a pupil in the top year who's clearly a very talented scientist. He's doing maths, further maths, physics and chemistry, absolute top notch, couldn't ask for more. But when we sat at lunch and talked about what he was interested in doing, he was presenting on a particular work of art that they were doing in Div. And there's a
Mm.
competition where every pupil in their last 2 years has to present a piece of art and do an oral presentation on it. that was what was just he was on fire with at that moment. So
I was going to say that's what's going to inspire them, isn't it? So
yeah. So it's a lovely subject from that point of view.
Great. I wish I could be a schoolboy again and come to Winchester. It would be
Yes,
wonderful, wonderful. Elizabeth, I'm really sorry to say that we got to bring the conversation to a close there, but I'm going to start thinking about if I were to teach some div or whatever the phrase is, which subjects I would teach, and I'll think about that later. But thank you so much. It's lovely to see you again, and congratulations on everything you're achieving already in your second term at Winchester. And I look forward to next time we have a conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Russell. Bye-bye.
Bye.